Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something kind of different.
Oh,
Yeah, we're diving into some physics 220 notes.
cool.
Yeah. And the cool part is these are actually your notes on electricity and magnetism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're not just going to rehash everything you already know,
Yeah.
but we're going to pull out those aha moments.
Nice.
The stuff that makes electromagnetism really mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to go back to the fundamentals,
Exactly.
especially when we can connect them to the bigger picture.
For sure, for sure. And I gotta say, looking at these notes, they're impressive.
Oh, thanks.
You've even got like a hand-drawn diagram in here of a square wire loop with all these magnetic flux arrows going through it.
Yeah, I remember that.
It looks like you were really trying to visualize like how current flows in a magnetic field.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is that this simple diagram actually illustrates like a revolutionary idea, Faraday's law.
Absolutely. Before Faraday came along, people thought electricity and magnetism were like totally separate things.
Right.
But Faraday's genius was realizing that they were like two sides of the same coin.
Uh-huh.
His law shows that a changing magnetic field can actually create an electric field.
Whoa.
And that's what gets those electrons flowing.
So Faraday's law is like the ultimate power couple of physics.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Electricity and magnetism forever linked.
Precisely. And this connection is what drives like a ton of our modern technology.
Oh, wow.
You even have examples in your notes, things like regenerative braking in cars and that classic shaking flashlight demonstration.
Right, the shaking flashlight. I remember building one of those in high school, but honestly, I don't think I fully grasped the physics behind it back then.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah, you shake it, the magnet moves, and boom, suddenly you have light.
Uh-huh. Right. It feels like magic.
Yeah.
But it's pure physics.
Okay.
Each shake creates a changing magnetic field within that coil of wire.
Mm-hmm.
And Faraday's law kicks in to induce the current that powers the light.
Okay, that's making more sense now, but my notes also mentioned Lenz's law. Is that related?
Yet Lenz's law is like Faraday's partner in crime.
Okay.
If Faraday's law tells us that a changing magnetic field creates a current, Lenz's law tells us which way that current will flow.
Interesting.
It basically says nature likes to push back.
Okay.
The induced current will always flow in a way that tries to oppose the change in the magnetic field that created it.
So it's like physics has its own version of inertia.
Exactly. It's a constant push and pull between the changing magnetic field and the induced current. You can actually see it in your diagram of the square wire loop.
Oh, right.
Yeah, imagine pushing a magnet towards the loop.
Uh-huh.
The induced current will create its own magnetic field to try and push back.
Whoa, that's trippy.
Yeah.
My notes also have some diagrams of open and closed circuits
Yeah,
with batteries and switches and stuff.
the basics.
Yeah, it reminds me of those basic electricity experiments we did in school.
Oh, yeah, totally. Those basic circuits are the foundation for understanding how electricity flows, and your notes show that you've got that down, Pat. A closed circuit means that electrical path is complete.
Right.
For the current to flow, it's like opening a valve in a water pipe.
Right, and the battery acts like the pump pushing the current through the circuit.
Exactly.
But those simple circuits are a far cry from the electrical grid that powers our homes, right?
True. But the underlying principles are the same.
Wow.
From a simple flashlight to the most complex power system, it all comes down to controlling the flow of electrical charge.
That's amazing.
Speaking of complex systems, you even touch upon some pretty advanced concepts in your notes, like the formula for magnetic flux.
Uh-oh.
You even wrote down delta phi equals band delta T.
Yeah, haha, full disclosure. I remember copying down that formula,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not sure I ever fully understood what it meant.
Sure.
Can you break it down for me? What's the big takeaway from that equation?
It's all about quantifying that magnetic field, passing through a given area. Think of it like measuring rainfall.
Okay.
More rain, more flux.
Yeah.
The B represents the magnetic field strength. A is the area, N is the number of turns in a coil if you have one, and delta T is the change in time. So it's not just about how strong the magnetic field is, but how much of it is passing through a certain area over time.
Okay, that makes more sense now. It's like measuring the flow of something invisible but incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
My notes also mention something about three-phase power in motors. Is that related to this magnetic flux idea?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But before we get into the complexities of three-phase power, let's dive a bit deeper into how these principles show up in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about things like household wiring and those giant transformers you see on power lines.
Okay.
Those transformers are using Faraday's law in a big way.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Let's unpack those real-world applications. So those transformers you mentioned, they're like the unsung heroes of the electrical grid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they use Faraday's law to like step up or step down the voltage,
Okay.
which is super important for transmitting electricity efficiently over long distances.
So it's kind of like they're speaking louder so someone far away can hear them,
Exactly.
and then whispering when they're close by.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Stepping up the voltage for long-distance transmission reduces energy loss.
Oh, I see.
And then transformers near our homes step it back down to that safe and usable 120 volts.
That makes sense. But my notes also talk about household wiring
Right.
and how it's designed to handle that flow of electricity safely. There's something about circuit breakers playing a crucial role.
Ah, yes, circuit breakers. They're like the safety guards of our electrical system.
Oh, okay.
If the current gets too high, maybe because you plugged in too many appliances at once,
Mm-hmm.
the circuit breaker trips, interrupting the flow and preventing a potential fire.
So they're kind of like electrical fuses, but reusable.
Exactly. They're essential for protecting our homes from electrical hazards. And speaking of safety, you even touched on another important concept in your notes, inductance.
Right. Inductance, if I remember correctly, it has something to do with a circuit's tendency to resist changes in current.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's one of those concepts that always felt a bit fuzzy to me.
Yeah, inductance can be tricky.
Yeah.
Think of it like electrical inertia. Just like it takes effort to get a heavy object moving. It takes effort to change the flow of current in a circuit.
Okay.
And the faster you try to change that current, the more pushback you get from inductance.
So it's kind of like electrical resistance, but specifically to changes in current.
That's a good way to think about it. And it plays a crucial role in all sorts of devices, especially electric motors.
That's right. My notes mention something about electric motors using inductance for specific functions.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges with electric motors is that initial surge of current when you first turn them on.
Right.
Inductance fights against that sudden change, which can actually damage the motor if not managed properly.
So how do you deal with that?
That's where inductors come into play. They're like electrical shock absorbers,
Okay.
smoothing out that initial current surge and protecting the motor.
So inductors are like the bouncers of the electrical world, keeping things orderly?
I love that analogy. They make sure the current doesn't get out of control. And while we're on the topic of controlling electricity, you also have a section in your notes about capacitance
Uh-huh.
and how it's used in power distribution systems.
Capacitance, another one of those concepts that always made my head spin a little. I remember thinking of capacitors like tiny batteries.
They do have some similarities to batteries in that they store electrical energy,
Right.
but instead of storing it chemically, like a battery capacitors, store energy directly as an electric field. Think of them like tiny reservoirs.
Okay.
That can release a burst of electrical charge when needed.
So they're like electrical shock absorbers, but for voltage instead of current?
That's a great way to put it in power distribution systems.
Mm.
Those reservoirs help maintain a stable voltage supply,
Okay.
even when demand fluctuates. Imagine everyone in a neighborhood cranking up their AC on a hot day.
Yeah.
That sudden surge in demand could cause the voltage to dip, potentially causing problems for sensitive electronics. So the capacitors release some of their stored charge to compensate, keeping the voltage steady.
So they act like a buffer, smoothing out those fluctuations.
Precisely. They ensure a reliable power supply.
You know, it's amazing to think about how much complexity goes into keeping our lights on and our devices running.
It is, isn't it?
It's like a giant electrical puzzle, and each component plays a specific role.
It's a remarkable system. And speaking of puzzles, your hand-drawn diagrams really bring these concepts to life.
Right. I was flipping through my notes earlier, and I was impressed by how much effort I put into those diagrams. I guess I was trying to visualize those invisible forces at play.
Yeah.
Let's take a closer look at those diagrams. I'm curious to hear your perspective on them.
Let's do it. They offer a visual roadmap to understanding these concepts, like the one showing the square wire loop with the magnet moving through it.
Yeah.
It's a classic illustration of Faraday's law in action.
I remember spending a lot of time on that diagram, trying to wrap my head around how the direction of current flow depends on whether the magnet is moving towards or away from the loop.
It's a key point, and it all comes back to Lenz's law. Remember, nature likes to push back.
Right.
If the magnet is moving towards the loop, the induced current will create its own magnetic field to try and oppose that motion. It's like a magnetic tug of war.
Okay. That visual really helps, and I even drew a diagram of a closed circuit with a battery and a switch.
Right, the basics.
What's important about that one?
That diagram highlights the essential elements of a circuit. A source of electromotive force the battery. a path for the current to flow the wires, and a way to control the flow of current, the switch.
Right, and it shows that a closed switch completes the circuit, allowing the current to flow from the battery through the wires. It's a simple concept, but it's the foundation for everything from flashlights to power grids.
Absolutely. It all comes down to controlling that flow of electrical charge. And speaking of controlling electricity, remember those real-world applications you mentioned? Things like regenerative braking in cars
Yeah.
and how household wiring is designed to keep us safe.
Right, those applications show how these principles we've been discussing are woven into our everyday lives. Regenerative braking, for example, uses Faraday's law to capture energy that would otherwise be wasted as heat.
It's brilliant when an electric or hybrid car breaks the wheels, turn a generator,
Uh-huh.
which creates a changing magnetic field. That changing magnetic field induces a current, which recharges the car's battery.
Whoa.
It's a fantastic example of turning physics into practical technology.
So it's like getting a little boost of energy every time you hit the brakes.
Exactly. And then there's household wiring, which is all about safety.
Huh.
We use a standard voltage of 120 volts
Right.
because it's high enough to power our appliances, but low enough to minimize the risk of serious shock.
Right. And circuit breakers act as safety valves, interrupting the flow of current if it gets too high, protecting our homes and appliances.
It's all about balance harnessing the power of electricity while ensuring that it's used safely and reliably.
You know, looking back at my notes, it's clear that I was trying to grasp some pretty advanced concepts in Physics 220.
Yeah, for sure.
We've covered a lot of ground today: Faraday's law, lenses, law inductance, capacitance circuits, transformers, and even touched on those real-world applications.
It's a lot.
But there's one more concept that I tackled in my notes that I'm still a bit hazy on:
Oh.
three-phase power.
Ah, yes, three-phase power. That's where things get really interesting.
Mhm.
You were venturing into the world of industrial-grade electricity.
I remember being fascinated by the idea of three alternating currents,
Yeah,
each shifted in phase by 120 degrees,
right.
creating this rotating magnetic field, but I'm not sure I ever fully grasped the why and how of it all.
Well, get ready for another aha moment because three-phase power is a game changer, especially when it comes to motors and the efficient delivery of electricity.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's dive into the world of three-phase power. All right, three-phase power, lay it on me. Why is it such a big deal?
It all comes down to efficiency and power. Remember those single-phase AC circuits we talked about?
Yeah.
Where the current changes direction back and forth?
Mhm.
Well, with three-phase power, you've got three of those currents each shifted in time, like a carefully choreographed dance.
Okay, so I'm picturing three waves each peaking at a different time, but why three? Is it just because three is a magic number?
Uh-huh. It's not magic, but it is pretty clever that a 120-degree shift between the phases creates a rotating magnetic field. It's like a magnetic vortex that spins continuously.
Ah, that's the connection to motors that I saw in my notes. So instead of a back and forth magnetic field, you have one that's constantly spinning, making the motor spin more smoothly and powerfully.
Exactly. And that smooth power is why three-phase systems are used for like heavy-duty applications, industrial machinery, electric trains, you name it.
Oh.
It's like having three horses pulling a chariot perfectly in sync. Much more efficient than a single horse struggling to do it all.
So three-phase power is like the workhorse of the electrical world.
You could say that it's the backbone of our modern electrical grid, quietly powering the industries that keep our world running. But even in our homes, where single-phase power is the norm, the principles of electromagnetism are constantly at work.
Right. Every time we flip a light switch or plug in a device, we're tapping into this incredible network of power generation, transmission, and distribution. It's mind-blowing to think about all the physics happening behind the scenes.
And what's even more remarkable is that these principles discovered centuries ago by folks like Faraday and Lenz are still shaping the cutting edge of technology today.
Speaking of the future, we've talked about how electromagnetism powers our world today, but what about tomorrow? Where are these principles taking us next?
That's the exciting part. The possibilities are endless. Wireless power transfer, advanced medical imaging, even new forms of transportation, like maglev trains that levitate using magnets. Electromagnetism is at the heart of it all.
This deep dive has been electrifying. I feel like I've not only refreshed my Physics 220 knowledge, but gained a whole new appreciation for the invisible forces that shape our lives.
It's been a pleasure exploring your notes and unraveling these concepts together. Remember, the key to understanding complex systems is to break them down into those fundamental principles, those aha moments that make it all click.
And to never stop asking questions, right?
Absolutely. Curiosity is the spark that ignites discovery.
A huge thanks to you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of electromagnetism. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.